I have done many videos, as you're well aware, and I will tell you there are two topics that constantly give me pushback, and this is one of them. This is about the prodigal perspective. I, as everyone knows, was the prodigal 30 plus years ago. I left my husband for another man. We were apart for 4 years, and I was with that other person for 2 years before I had 2 years to myself to kind of get my head back together. When my husband and I eventually reconciled, it took many, many years for us to kind of get good and get all of that behind us. So the topic I want to talk about today is really helping you to understand infidelity from the perspective of the prodigal. Here's the pushback I get is when I talk about this, several of you, many of you have said that if you perceive that what I'm saying is defending the prodigal as if it was your fault he or she had an affair. Well, if you've known me for a while now, you also know that I'm brutally honest. So, excuse me, I'm going to start with saying this. The prodigal is 100% responsible for his or her affair. Got it. No one is to blame but me. I'll never blame my husband. It is not his fault. So keep that packaged as I go on, and do not think that I am saying it is your fault. But when the two shall be as one, there's always a system. My reactions affect my husband, his actions affect mine, and so on and so forth. When someone has an affair, it damages the unit, it damages the marriage, but we all know that. The betrayer is perceived as the bad guy, and the betrayed person is the one who gets all the sympathy, right? Ditch the girl. She's such a hoe. She treated you such and such a way. You deserve to do better. You deserve better. Well, let me tell you right up front. When you talk to someone whose spouse has had an affair, though that may sound like you're defending them, they often don't want to hear that, because remember, this person that cheated on them is their spouse. They love them. They've, made love to them. They've made humans together most of the time. So while it may seem like they want to hear you say, yeah, he's a jerk, she's a dirtbag, whatever, you're the good guy, that's not what they want to hear. So if you go to my website, breakfastwithbacon.com, I have my article on I Am a Stander. And in that article, it talks about like the 25 rules of standing. And one of them says simply this: remember that you are not the good guy and your prodigal is not the bad guy. Basically, the person who had the affair is not the bad guy and you're the good guy because you didn't. Great, you didn't have an affair, but you're not perfect, nor is the person who had the affair. And so for right away, this starts getting people edgy. It's like, but it's your fault. I got it. But if we constantly go into our relationships looking at the person who didn't do anything wrong and blame all the blame on the prodigal, your marriage isn't getting healed. Your friend's marriage isn't getting healed. Because if we look at this, the verse that I used, and there was Matthew 7:3, was simply the one that says, don't be so focused on the speck in your brother's eye until you've dealt with the beam in your own. And now I'm not saying that your spouse having an affair is a speck and all your sins are the beam, though I will say, in many cases, you got a big old beam in your eye. In my own relationship, and my husband and I, again, we've talked about this for years. So in a way, he understands what I talk about on the air. It's not something we want to talk about anymore because it's so far behind us. But basically, he was not the good guy and I wasn't the bad guy. It's just that my sin was the sin that was much more in your face. It was the one that everyone could categorize. I say that about people in prison. Yeah, they're in prison for a reason. They broke laws, but they just happen to get caught. A lot of you guys do the same things that put people in prison. You just didn't get caught. So a little bit of a diversion off the subject there. But I want you to reconcile. So I want you to understand the prodigal's perspective. So if you go into this attacking the prodigal and just trying to make him or her feel like they are completely at fault, and you want to throw in their faces their sins, you're not going to get anywhere. So for those of you that are like, no, I don't want to throw them in their face. I just want to get past this. Let's deal with it. Let's move on. You do need to understand what is taking place. For instance, something very painful for someone reconciling with their spouse that had an affair is many of you don't want to hear that attraction. I call it the love cocktail, or in the case of an affair, I call it the lust cocktail. Those 11 hormones that come together to elevate and actually change your mind, change your mental status, your body, your physiology, and make you so hyper attracted to that person that you don't ever remember loving your spouse. It's actually just the way the biology works. Well, that doesn't wear off for at least 18 months to 2 years. So let's just say your spouse had an affair and he or she recognized the wrong of it and they got back together with you. And they're like, it was wrong. A lot of times you don't want to hear about the fact that they're still thinking about the other person, or that your prodigal has triggers. They might drive past a hotel that they were at with the other person. I'm not saying that that's good, but I'm saying those are things that are happening. So you can be blind and stick your head in the sand and say, I'm just going to make sure they don't do it. They said they're not going to think, and they ought to be over it. Well, guess what? You're the one that's being naive if you think that's the case. So how do you treat your prodigal? You've obviously wanted to reconcile with them, or you wouldn't be back together or pursuing it. Is having this heart of openness when you say, you know what? Some reconciling couples will set rules up, like if you're in a place, if you're having a mood, if you want to talk about it, I'll be open. It might not be the most pleasant thing to hear, but I would rather us build our relationships and talk about it. You know, do you notice that your spouse had maybe a tattoo that they got while they were a prodigal, and that tattoo reminds them of the other person, and now they've got it stuck to their arm forever, and what do they do with that? Or that mug or that cup that someone gave them, or a logo that they see. It is, Satan wants to throw at us everything he can to remind us of our sin, of our filth, what we did. Yeah, you're the bad guy. You can never be forgiven, if you wouldn't have screwed up your family. And so there is this, yeah, in a sense, I'm not trying to have you have pity for the betrayer, but betrayer is a sinner just like you are. So if you're going to treat them as if they're the only sinner and you're not, and you don't want to deal with this, then you're not going to reconcile. And you're actually not the type that should be advising friends whose friends have had affairs. But if you are to be like Christ and you are to try to love your enemies, how do you have empathy for the sinner like me? I walked into a trap of infidelity. I didn't expect to. I'm not that kind of a person. And so how did I deal with it for the months and the years after it ended, but then after my husband and I reconciled? I still had to live with this. I'm smarter than that. What did I do? How did I allow myself? Or further yet, I'm a good Christian. At least I thought I was. How did I do that? Now, I can't say that to a spouse who's like, yeah, thought you're a good Christian. How'd you do that? If you throw that in my face, I am not going to want to open up with you. You need to create for me that space that allows me to be vulnerable, that allows me to say, I'm sorry. You want the apology. So if you create a space that's more defensive or guarded or closed so that your prodigal like me can't speak, it's not only not going to heal me, it's not going to heal your marriage, because the whole can't heal until at least if one half of it is unhealed. So understand that your prodigal has to go through a spiritual, a physical, a mental, a cognitive purging of the other person. And what you do will either help or hinder in that progress. It's humbling, absolutely humbling, especially your friends who might see you reconciled with your spouse, who they all know that he cheated on you, she cheated on you. And now I see you out in a restaurant having dinner with him. A lot of times we're afraid of how we are being judged. Maybe I should treat my spouse like he's a jerk or let them know I put him in his place. People are always going to judge you. Always. Some judge rightly, some judge wrongly, some unfairly, some fairly. But you know what? It doesn't matter. The problem is when we care about what other people think. The only one you need to care about is Jesus. What does he say? He says, love your enemy. He says, forgive one another. He says, turn the other cheek. When you forgive your prodigal, when you allow him or her to heal, to be cleansed of their infidelity, it will bless you in turn. So I just wanted to do this to remind you that those of us who have stepped into that trap, for the most part, most everyone I've met, I can think of one person who maybe he didn't care. And I know he had 6 affairs. And even with him, I don't know that he went into them willingly, but he seemed to not have any boundaries. But most people don't walk into affairs, even unhappily married people. So again, I'll say what I've said before, happily married people have affairs. It's not a sign of your poor marriage. And unhappily married people will sometimes, just stay in a relationship and not seek to have an affair. But boy, once it happens, it reminds us, it lets us think there's something better out there. But in both cases, it's wrong. In both cases, it's adultery. And in all cases, we are called to forgive. We want to make ourselves a welcome mat, not a doormat. And that, my friends, is the toughest part. But if you seek God's wisdom, if you seek guidance on, how do I forgive my spouse? Does he or she look contrite? I know that they're still texting. I saw some of the texts. But then you see that they're trying to work towards reconciling with you. That also is one of those processes of weaning ourselves off. We go through this phase of thinking, I don't need to be with him, but we can still be friends. Well, you eventually learn that once you've had an affair with someone, you can't be friends. You've just crossed a line. But if you kick your spouse out immediately because you notice that the OW or the OM texted them, code for other woman, other man, the OP, the other person, you're like, I told you to stop talking to him or her. Oftentimes your spouse didn't initiate it. Or are you willing to say, I know this takes time and it hurts to think that you're still in contact with him or her. But I just wanted to let you know that I'm not giving up on us. I know that that's part of the process, that it's hard for you. And while you know that hurts me, I'd like to work with you to set up maybe some boundaries when he or she reaches out. How about if you're just honest with me and tell me she reached out again? So there are things that we can do with our prodigals to help them to get away from the once infidelity. I will end this by saying, no, I'm not saying that the person who had the affair is the good guy. We made these mistakes, but we're just human like you. We want a happy marriage like you do. We just need to figure out how to do it. And the grace that you extend will make all the difference in the world in many cases. So you do have a lot more power than you realize. So that's what I wanted to put out there today. Not guilting you who stayed faithful or not responding rightly to your prodigal, but I am saying if you want him or her back and you want your marriage healed, there are steps you can take to open that door while he or she is healing. And the greater news about that is those of you who have weathered the storm of adultery and infidelity, and you've stayed married, those people often go on to have better marriages, more thriving and exciting marriages than those who never had to deal with this at all. I don't want anyone to have to deal with infidelity, but I will tell you, my husband and my marriage, we're about to celebrate our 40th, 4 entire decades. It is so much better because we cling to our marriage because of the affair in ways that I don't think we would have had it not happened. We know what we could have lost. We have a greater appreciation for the fight each of us puts into this, for the work we put into this, for the love that we show, because neither of us wants to take for granted the other. Neither of us don't want to start again, and neither of us wants to displease God. So if you have any questions on infidelity, what it's like on the prodigal side, your spouse is currently out having an affair and you have no idea what they're thinking, give me a call, text, post right here. Ask your question. I'll address it in a future video. I might even call you. But I want you to know that it is not a death knell to your marriage. So many more people's marriages that you look out and think, oh, Susie and Jim are so happy and they've had an affair, and you'll never know. I usually know because they all come to me. And I look at all the couples that I see that are like, wow, you don't even realize what they've been through, but I do. And look at how happy they are. So this is marriage. For better, for worse, sickness and health, good times and bad. You promised you'd stay the course. And if you need help doing so, look me up. I'll help you. It is possible. And with that, I'm Dr. Christine Bacon. This is Breakfast with Bacon. And remember, keep on living your life sunny side up. It's so much better than the alternative.